Hey dreamers, welcome to Dream Speaker, a place where real stories meet quiet moments. Here, we believe in the power of soft voices, deep thoughts, and storytelling that feels like a warm hug at the end of a long day. Whether you're here to fall asleep, find peace, or just need someone to understand, this space is for you. Tonight's story is called The Girl Who Found Her Voice in a World That Tried to Silence Her. It's about a quiet soul in a loud world, and her journey to discovering that her voice was never too small. It was just waiting to be heard by the right ears. So, get cozy, breathe deep, and let the story begin. Once upon a quiet town nestled between two foggy hills, lived a girl named Elara. From the moment she was born, people said she was different. Not because she looked strange, or acted out, or did anything loud. In fact, it was the opposite. Elara didn't speak much. Not because she couldn't, but because no one ever listened when she did. In a world that applauded noise and overlooked softness, Elara's voice was like wind through trees, gentle, honest, but often dismissed. As a child, she'd sit in the corner during class, answering questions in her mind, but never aloud. Teachers thought she was shy. Some thought she was slow, but Elara was neither. Her mind bloomed like a secret garden, thoughtful, creative, and full of stories that lived in silence. Her mother was always rushing, her father always tired. At dinner, when Elara tried to share her thoughts, the television was louder. She learned quickly, her words weren't wanted. At school, louder girls spoke over her, louder boys laughed at her softness. And so, she stopped speaking unless she had to. Elara turned 13 with a diary instead of friends. In that little notebook, she whispered to the page everything she wished she could say. She wrote poems about rainy windows, stories about imaginary kingdoms, and letters to people who never noticed her. It was her voice, safe and unfiltered, written down in ink. But even then, her silence began to hurt. Not her throat, her soul. One day, while walking home from school, Elara took the long path through the woods. It was quiet there. Finally, a place that listened. She found a fallen log and sat, opening to diary and reading a poem she had just written. But something strange happened. The wind moved gently through the leaves, as if it was listening. And in that moment she whispered, "Do you hear me?" to no one. And yet, she felt something say yes. Elara returned to the woods every day. She began reading her stories out loud. Her voice trembled at first, but the trees never laughed. The birds never interrupted. And one day, a strange figure appeared. An old woman, wrapped in a shawl made of morning mist. "I've been listening," she said. "Your voice isn't small, it's sacred." Elara blinked. "Why don't people hear me then?" The woman smiled. "Because they never learned how to listen." The woman became her mentor, teaching her not just how to speak louder, but how to believe that her voice deserved to be heard. Elara practiced speaking with the wind, the trees, the rivers. Nature never judged, and slowly, she began to carry that same voice into the world. At school, she read her poem aloud during open mic day. Hands trembled, voice cracked, but nobody laughed. Some even cried. Her voice touched something real. Years passed, Elara grew. She started a podcast, sharing stories that helped others feel seen. She gave talks at schools, teaching young kids that being quiet doesn't mean you're weak. She wrote books full of heart and honesty. The world didn't change overnight, but her voice did something powerful. It echoed. every person who had ever been silenced, Ilara became a lighthouse. You may not see her anymore in the small town between foggy hills, but if you ever walk through quiet woods, you might hear her voice, soft, steady, and unshaken, carried gently by the wind. Because Ilara found her voice, and she used it to help others find theirs. As Ilara grew into her 20s, her voice began to travel farther than she could have imagined. Her first podcast episode, recorded in her bedroom with nothing but a cheap mic and a candle lit nearby, went unnoticed at first. But one day, someone left a comment. "I didn't know anyone else felt like this. Thank you." Ilara reread it 10 times, and for the first time in her life, her words had echoed back. She kept going, week by week, story by story. Emails started to come in. Messages from girls who had been bullied, boys who felt invisible, grown women who were learning how to speak up at 40 years old. Ilara never claimed to have all the answers, but her honesty made people feel safe. And safety makes silence bloom into sound. She started workshops, safe spaces for quiet teens to write, speak, and be heard. She didn't just find her voice. She became a mirror for others to find theirs too. But the world is loud. As her audience grew, so did the noise. Critics, trolls, people who twisted her words or mocked her softness. And just like that, the old doubts returned. Maybe I'm still too quiet. Maybe I don't belong in this space. Maybe people only like me when I stay small. She stopped recording for weeks. Her notebook remained closed. The echo, once warm, now felt too far away. One rainy evening, Ilara checked her inbox. It was a letter from a 15-year-old girl named Soraya. She wrote about being bullied, about crying at night and pretending she was okay. She wrote about the first time she heard Ilara's story and how it gave her the courage to finally ask for help. At the bottom, she wrote, "I don't know you, but you saved me. Because of you, I spoke, and someone finally listened." Ilara cried. Not a quiet cry, not a silent tear, but the kind of cry that lets everything go. Ilara sat in front of her mic again, but this time she didn't try to sound brave. She didn't perform strength. She whispered into the mic, "I've been scared. I've doubted myself. But I know now, even a whisper can move mountains if it comes from truth." And just like that, her voice became home again. Not for applause, not for performance, but for peace. Now, if you walk through the woods where Ilara used to sit, you'll still hear the wind move softly between the trees. If you listen closely, you'll hear stories, gentle, steady, sacred. Because when one girl finds her voice, she leaves behind a trail for others to follow. And now, it's your turn. Speak even if your voice shakes, because silence was never your story. Your voice is the magic the world didn't know it needed.
His name was Kai, and in nearly every room he entered, he didn't feel like a person, he felt like air. In elementary school, he was the kid who finished his work early and quietly waited. He didn't need help, but he didn't draw attention either. Teachers forgot to call on him. He wasn't loud enough for the popular kids. He wasn't troubled enough for the counselors. He wasn't weird. He was just unnoticed. His birthday parties were never full. His name was often mispronounced, and even when he raised his hand, someone louder would always speak first. At home, things weren't much different. His mom was exhausted from work. His dad often retreated into silence or football games. Nobody was cruel to Kai, but indifference can be its own kind of cruelty. He grew up believing that if he just stayed quiet, he wouldn't make things worse, so he learned how to disappear without ever leaving. He was kind, thoughtful, observant, but those weren't traits that got you noticed in a world that worshipped noise. He walked lightly, he smiled politely, he lived in the background. And every time he walked into a room, he wondered if anyone would remember he had ever been there. By 15, Kai had started to feel the weight of his invisibility. It wasn't just loneliness. It was a deep ache, a question that replayed like background noise. Am I even real if no one sees me? At school, he was called quiet, so often it became his identity. But nobody asked why he was quiet. Nobody asked what he wanted to say. He journaled instead, filled pages with thoughts he didn't have the courage to speak, wrote stories where the invisible boy became a hero, or a rebel, or even a villain, because even villains got attention. He started skipping lunch to avoid the cafeteria, started walking slower in hallways to avoid being bumped into. One night, he wrote in his journal, "Maybe I was never meant to be seen. Maybe some people are just here to watch life happen to others." But then came the assignment. His English teacher introduced a poetry unit. At the end, students could volunteer to share their writing. Kai didn't plan to, but something inside him, some tiny thread of defiance, signed the form anyway. For 2 weeks, he rewrote the same poem. It was about a boy who walked through life like a shadow, not because he wanted to, but because no one ever turned on the light. When the day arrived, he stood up in front of a half-interested classroom. His hands trembled, his breath caught, but his voice, though soft, carried something true. Line by line he spoke, and when he finished, for a moment it was silent. Then one person clapped, just one, but in that moment, it was the loudest thing Kai had ever heard.
Something shifted in Kai after that day. He wasn't instantly popular. He didn't transform into someone new. But for the first time, he felt real. A classmate came up to him after the reading and said, "That poem felt like me." It was the first time anyone had related to him out loud, and it cracked something open. He joined the after-school writing group, started writing stories and sharing them anonymously online. Each post received just a few comments, but they mattered. They said things like, "I thought I was the only one. Your words helped me breathe." Kai began to realize something powerful. His invisibility had made him a better observer, a deeper thinker, and a more empathetic person. He hadn't disappeared. He had simply been waiting to be received by the right hearts. At 17, he gave a small speech at an open mic night. His voice cracked, his hands shook, but he spoke anyway. And when he looked out into the crowd, he didn't see strangers. He saw people listening. He was no longer invisible, not because he screamed, not because he changed, but because he finally stopped trying to shrink himself into silence. Kai still loved quiet. He still preferred small circles, but now he lived out loud in his own way. He understood that being seen doesn't mean being famous or loud or constantly noticed. It means being understood by others and, more importantly, by yourself. And to anyone listening to his story now, if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered if your presence mattered, let this be your proof. You don't need the whole world to notice you. Sometimes it only takes one person, and sometimes that one person is you.
Thank you for listening to tonight's stories. If you felt something, even a little shift in your heart, know that was your voice gently rising to the surface. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story that feels like home. Until next time, sleep softly, dream deeply, and remember, your story is far from over.